Cartello.
Eh sì. No, chiudi proprio. Sì.
Ok.
Vuoi dire cosa?
Ok.
Что надо сделать, Дармен?
Презентация есть?
А как вот этот слайд включать потом?
Да.
Ну что нажал, чтобы слайд запустить?
PowerPoint.
Покажи.
Там этот идет? Ой, бля.
Да, да. Идет.
Что с ним? Всё.
А как запустить? Как?
Просто нажимаешь. Раз.
Не,
И сюда.
на мой посмотри.
Я не знаю, как у тебя. У тебя PDF, по-моему. Я не знаю, как.
Там на весь экран хоть?
Это что, через код делал, да?
А?
Код делал?
Код? Что за код? Не, я сам не делал.
Не ты делал?
Не. Как будто одинаково, да?
Я к тому, что через яичко делал. Яичко.
А. У нас одинаково, что ли? Типа этот дизайн? Нет. Раз.
Когда я start the my
Buongiorno. Buongiorno a tutti, benvenuti a questa seduta di laurea dell'Università degli Studi di Cassino e del Lazio Meridionale. Sentiremo prima i laureandi delle lauree triennali che hanno a disposizione 5 minuti per la loro presentazione e poi i laureandi delle lauree magistrali che hanno a disposizione 10 minuti. Dopodiché il collegio si riunirà per la valutazione finale e proclameremo i laureati. Molti dei nostri laureandi sono di lingua inglese, quindi una parte delle presentazioni avverrà in lingua inglese. We will start from the bachelor students who have 5 minutes for presenting their thesis, and then we will follow with graduate students for their master thesis, and they will have 10 minutes to present their work. So we start with Darmen Amanali. Darmen has written a thesis under my supervision on whether Kazakhstan, which is his home country, can become a logistic hub. So you have the floor. You have 5 minutes for your presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon for everyone. Today I would like to present my bachelor thesis entitled Can Kazakhstan become a logistic hub between China and Europe after 2022? I chose this topic because international trade has changed a lot last a few years. So after 2022, many companies started looking for new transport routes between China and Europe. Because of these changes, Kazakhstan received a new opportunity to become an important country for international trade between China and Europe. So my research focuses on one main question. Can Kazakhstan become a logistic hub between China and Europe after 2022? To answer this question, I had 3 objectives. First, I wanted to analyze how trade between China and Europe changed after 2022. Second, I evaluated Kazakhstan's logistic potential. I wanted to understand whether the country has a necessary infrastructure and transport network to become an international logistic hub. Finally, I identified the main opportunities and challenges that Kazakhstan faces today. I chose this topic because Kazakhstan has a unique geographical position. It connects China with Europe and is located on the Middle Corridor, which has become much more important after 2022. To answer my research question, I used 3 evaluation criteria. The first criterion is connectivity. This means the quality of railways, ports, logistic terminals, and transport infrastructure. So a country cannot become a logistic hub without a good connection. The second criterion is transit volume. This shows how much cargo actually passes through Kazakhstan. If transit volume grows, it means that more companies trust this road. The third criterion is cost efficiency. This is very important because companies always compare transport costs, delivery time, and reliability before choosing a road. To support my analysis, I used the data from the international organizations and the official statistics. My research produces 3 main findings. Firstly, Kazakhstan has made strong progress in connectivity. The country has invested in railways, logistics centers, and the ports of Aktsau and Kurik. This investment improves transport infrastructure and reduces delivery times. Second, transit volume has grown quickly. More cargo now passes through the middle corridor than before. This shows that Kazakhstan has become more important for trade between China and Europe. However, the total volume is still much smaller than the northern corridor. The third finding is about cost efficiency. This is still a weakness point. The middle corridor is more expensive because cargo crosses several borders and must also cross the Caspian Sea. These extra steps increase transport costs and sometimes cause delays. Overall, my finding shows that Kazakhstan has made good progress, but there is still room to improvement. So, my research also identified several important challenges. The first challenge is high transport costs. Even though infrastructure has improved, the middle corridor is still more expensive than some alternative roads. The second challenge is the Caspian Sea crossing. Ferry capacity is limited and the weather condition can sometimes delay transportation. Another challenge is Kazakhstan's dependence on partner countries such as Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey. The corridor can only work efficiently if all countries cooperate. There is also the problem of empty return cargo. Many containers return without goods, which increases transportation costs. Finally, the middle corridor continues to compete with maritime shipping and the northern corridor, which remains strong competitors. These challenges reduce the competitiveness of the corridor and must be solved in the future. So, to conclude, Kazakhstan has made significant progress since 2022. The country has improved its infrastructure, increased transit volumes, and strengthened international cooperation. There are important achievements and shows that Kazakhstan is becoming a more important transport country in Eurasia. However, my research also shows that Kazakhstan is not yet a fully developed logistic hub. Transport costs remain high, capacity is still limited, and some important challenges dependent on cooperation with other countries. So, my answer to the research question is yes, but with some conditions. Kazakhstan can become a logistic hub, but it will be developed as a complementary corridor, not a replacement for the northern corridor or maritime transport. In my opinion, Kazakhstan is a hub in the making. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Next candidate is Arman Aidarov, who has written a thesis again under my supervision on inflation in his country in the last 10 years. So you have 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, esteemed members of the committee. My name is Arman Aidarov, and today I will present my bachelor thesis, Inflation in Uzbekistan over the past 10 years, supervised by Professor Gennaro Dzedza. Since 2016, Uzbekistan has been transitioning from a centrally planned economy toward a market-oriented system. This reform stimulated economic growth, but also made inflation one of the country's main macroeconomic challenges. With a population of 37 million, inflation directly affects purchasing power, living standards, and public trust. My first finding concerns the evolution of inflation over the last decade. The main turning point came in 2017, when the Uzbek sum was liberalized. Currency depreciation increased import price, and inflation reached almost 18% in 2018. COVID-19 and global food and energy shocks then keep inflation elevated. Since 2023, however, inflation has gradually declined. Looking at 2025, we can clearly see the disinflation process. Inflation exceeds 10% in spring, but is projected to fall to around 7.3% by December. This reflects tighter monetary policy and easing global commodity price. My research identified 5 main drivers of inflation. These include rapid credit growth, exchange rate pass-through, structural inefficiencies, external shocks, and fiscal pressure. Among them, the exchange rate pass-through following the 2017 currency liberalization was particularly important. Together, these factors explain the persistence of inflation. Inflation is not only an economic issue, but also a social one. Rising prices reduce household purchasing power, especially for low and middle-income families. At the same time, higher cost and uncertainty create challenges for business and investment. The government and the central bank have responded through currency liberalization, inflation targeting, tighter monetary policy, and target social support. However, monetary transmission remains relatively weak because the financial sector is still developing. This limits the speed at which monetary policy affects the real economy. To conclude, my research shows 4 main points. First, inflation is closely connected to Uzbekistan's economic transition. Second, it's driven by monetary, structural, and external factors. Third, its social impact is particularly strong and vulnerable households. Finally, Long-term price stability will require coordinated policies and strong institutions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you. Next candidate is Hermela Bihane. She has done a thesis under my supervision, and I must congratulate her because she is one of the first graduates in the new bachelor program in economics with data science, and she's done an excellent job with her thesis as well as with her internship. So you have the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hermela. Before I begin, I would like to thank God for helping me reach this day, and to my professor, Gennaro Ziza, for your guidance, and to my families and friends who are watching this on the live stream and here in the classroom. So today I'll be presenting my thesis titled Agricultural Productivity Determinants among the Ethiopian smallholder households. So starting from the context, agriculture is the backbone of Ethiopia's economy. It approximately employs 63% of the labor force and contributes 37% of the GDP as 2022, yet the smallholder yields remains among the lowest in sub-Saharan Africa. So the government response has been the blanket fertilizer policy for decades, prescribing uniform fertilizer rates across all the crops and zones. While national policy is now shifting, the blanket application remains widespread in practice. So the problem is that Ethiopia is enormously diverse, and the crop grown in the humid highlands face completely different conditions from the crop grown in the semi-arid lowlands. So this raises the questions that what actually drives the difference in the yield and for the farmers, and does the answer varies by the crop or by the zones? So to analyze this, I raised the 4 questions and objectives. Do the fertilizer vary across agroecological zone? Beyond the fertilizer, how do the soil management practice the shape yields? And thirdly, what role do household characteristics and climate shock plays? And lastly, are productivity determinants consistent among the crops, or the crop follows their own path? So let's move to the data and methodology. The data was drawn from the Ethiopian Socioeconomic Panel Survey Wave 5, collected in 2021 and 2022, joining by the World Bank and Ethiopian Central Statistical Agency. The data has finally 1,193 households across the 150 enumeration areas, which is represented on the left side of the map. Each dot represents the enumeration areas and colored by the crop types. So different data sets were made by maize, teff, sorghum, and coffee, selected based on their threshold 300 households, which are the most relevant crops in Ethiopia. So the first is for each crops, log linear regression were independently estimated. This log regression, I changed the transformation to the log because it's easy. It allows us to interpret the coefficients in the percentage differences. And then the variables are selected in 2 steps, the bivariate screening, then followed by the step AIC, which gives us 4 specific separate models. And then the agroecological fixed was necessary, included in my model, because it isolates the effects regardless of the geographic area. Then finally, the diagnostic check were run. So before the results, I check all the models of their reliability. First, linearity were confirmed among all the 4 models, just a little biased on the normality distribution, but it's appropriate for this model. And then unequal error was detected, which means the prediction error was higher for the high yield farmers than the low yield, which is corrected by HC3 robust standard error, which changes the significance dates without changing anything for the coefficient estimations. And then an unusual outlier was detected and removed by the Cook's distance. This is the 4 results of my regression. Let me just highlight the main patterns. For the teff, the fertilizer users produce more than twice the yield of the non-users, and it's not even significant for the sorghum and not even relevant for the coffee. similar input, but we get different output. This implies that the uniform fertilizer approach doesn't work for all the crops. And in the organic manure, as of the literature, all the 4 crops has the negative effects, but they just use the degraded land for this variable, so it doesn't work. Then for the female-headed households, for the teeth, they produce less than 30%, even with equal inputs. So this also has a major effect. And finally, the crop shock, which cuts the coffee by 91%, which is the largest negative effect in my model. Then the crop-specific determinants and the key findings. For the maize, the geography is the dominant agroecological zone. Effect is like 8 to 12 times larger than the fertilizer. And for the teff, as I mentioned before, the fertilizer dominates. And for the sorghum, soil quality is the most strongest predictor. And for the coffee, labor efficiency and drought drives the productivity. Also, agroecological zone interaction test for the fertilizer was used across all the zones, and I get the similar results. So the adoption gap reflects the access barrier, not just the difference of agromatic differences. For the policy recommendation based on my results, first, the crop-specific must be accelerated for the field implementation, and then the soil investments must be prioritized for the sorghum and maize, and the extension service must be addressed for the gap of gender, and then investing in the drought, prioritizing the drought-resistant varieties, and water harvesting infrastructures for the smallholder coffee is necessary. To conclude my thesis, what was found for each follows the distinct productivity pathway shaped by the different combination of geographic input, household characteristic, and the climate. What does that mean? A single uniform policy cannot effectively address the diversity of the farming system across the Ethiopian agroecological zone. So the contribution of this thesis provides the household level empirical evidence needed to move this towards the crop-specific zone-sensitive agricultural policy. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you. Prossima candidata è Arianna Pittiglio, che discute una tesi con la professoressa Castelli.
Buonasera a tutti, benvenuti. La candidata Arianna Pittiglio discute una tesi dal titolo Concorrenza e appalti pubblici, un'analisi delle dinamiche di mercato nelle gare per la ristorazione scolastica. E, sotto la mia supervisione, ma con il contributo della professoressa Balzano e della dottoressa Altimari, che ringrazio. Arianna ha fatto veramente un bellissimo lavoro per una tesi triennale. La prego quindi di raccontare alla platea i risultati che ha ottenuto.
Grazie. Buon pomeriggio a tutti, io sono Arianna e il mio lavoro ha avuto per oggetto un'analisi del mercato delle gare per il servizio di ristorazione scolastica. L'obiettivo è stato quello di comprendere se l'attuale sistema di aggiudicazione delle gare d'appalto favorisce o meno la creazione di mercati non concorrenziali. Una volta raccolti i dati inerenti agli appalti 2025, sono state effettuate analisi descrittive, multivariate e della concorrenza. Dalla prima parte di analisi descrittive è possibile definire che in media la durata degli appalti per il servizio di ristorazione scolastica è di circa 3 anni e vede la partecipazione di un numero di imprese pari a 3, che per aggiudicarsi l'appalto offrono in media un ribasso del 5%. Inoltre possiamo dire che gli enti pubblici stanziano circa 518.000 euro l'anno per appalto e richiedono un numero di pasti annui pari a 96.000 a circa 5 euro l'uno. Sono stati poi effettuati indici di relazioni tra le variabili e interessanti ai fini dello studio è la relazione che c'è tra il numero di partecipanti e il ribasso offerto, la quale è una relazione positiva debole pari a 0,3 e sta ad indicare che all'aumentare del numero di partecipanti aumenta il ribasso offerto, constatando quindi l'esistenza di concorrenza all'interno del mercato. Altra relazione interessante è quella tra l'importo a pasto a base di gara e i numeri di pasti annui. In questo caso la relazione è negativa, seppur sempre debole, pari a meno 0,22 e sta ad indicare che all'aumentare dell'importo a pasto diminuiscono i numeri di pasti annui richiesti dall'ente appaltante e viceversa. Questo sta a indicare sostanzialmente che gli enti pubblici in un qualche modo incitano quelle che sono le economie di scala, che per ovvie ragioni va ad escludere quelli che sono i piccoli agricoltori agroalimentari biologici e locali, i quali, facendo parte di una filiera corta, frammentata ma soprattutto artigianale, non riescono a sfruttare le economie di scala e a far fronte a dei prezzi di base così compressi. Dal cerchio delle correlazioni dell'analisi in componenti principale viene confermato ciò che le analisi descrittive ci hanno anticipato, e cioè l'esistenza di concorrenza all'interno del mercato, data la relazione negativa debole tra l'importo complessivo offerto e l'importo offerto annuo, e lo sfruttamento di economie di scala, dato la relazione negativa che c'è tra l'importo offerto annuo e i numeri di pasti annui. Dal dendogramma della cluster analysis effettuata per area geografica è invece interessante il primo cluster che si viene a formare, che vede l'aggregazione delle aree del sud subito dopo quelle del nord. È stata poi analizzata la concorrenza attraverso la curva di Lorenz, dal quale il mercato risulta apparentemente concentrato. Tuttavia, nel momento in cui viene calcolato l'indice di Herfindahl, questo prevede un valore molto basso. Di conseguenza, il mercato non può essere definito a rischio monopolio. Questo porta a intuire l'esistenza di un mercato stratificato, costituito da un mercato nazionale in cui operano le grandi imprese, che concorrono maggiormente tra loro, dati gli strumenti economici posseduti, e tanti mercati locali in cui invece operano le piccole imprese. Di conseguenza, una maggiore lottizzazione degli appalti favorirebbe la riduzione del livello di concentrazione e la partecipazione dei piccoli produttori agroalimentari, biologici e locali. Grazie per l'attenzione e buon proseguimento.
Grazie. Next candidate is Selda Abazzari. She is also a quick graduate of our new bachelor program, and she discusses a thesis supervised by Professor Balzano.
Thank you. Selda wrote a very good thesis where she compared some machine learning classification algorithm with some traditional methods and using some medical data set with different characteristics. And please, Selda, show us your findings, main findings.
Thank you, Professor. Good afternoon, respected members of committee and dear audience. Today I'm going to present my thesis. Before beginning, I would like to thank my supervisor, Professor Simona Balzano, for her continuous guidance, support, and encouragement throughout this work. Then special thanks to my dear mother and my dear father for their unconditional love, support, endless encouragement, and countless sacrifices. Also thanks to my dear brother and my friends that they are here today with me. My topic is the comparative analysis of some machine learning algorithms on different medical data sets. First of all, the application of the appropriate machine learning algorithm can be really useful for the early detection of diseases and also for making predictions for the future analysis. Since my topic is the comparative analysis, the main objective of my research is to compare 6 machine learning algorithms, then evaluate their performance on 3 medical datasets, and finally identify the best performing algorithm for each dataset. The main research questions can arise from my analysis are the following questions. First question, what is the best performing model that is associated with each specific data set? Second question, what is the relationship between the size of the data and best performing model? And last question, how can we evaluate the performance of the models and which matrices can be used in order to expand the analysis? In methodology section, 3 different data sets are selected from the reliable source with various features respectively: heart disease with 918 records, kidney disease with 400 records, and diabetes with 768 records. In general, there are 18 experiments that I have done for this research. Then I applied 6 models, including logistic regression, decision tree, support vector machine, bagging boosting, and random forest. Additionally, I evaluated the performance of the models by considering the different performance metrics such as accuracy, precision, and recall. Accuracy measures the overall model performance, precision measures the correctness of the positive predictions, and recall measures the ability to define the positive cases. Moreover, different preprocessing techniques were applied for each data set in order to improve the quality of data while ensuring the consistency and accuracy at the same time. For instance, splitting data into testing and training sets proportionally, mean imputation, and handling missing values with different techniques. Based on the accuracy factor, the best performing model for the first data set is considered as a decision tree. For the second data set is considered as a random forest. And for the last data set, which represents the kidney chronic disease data set, I obtained interesting findings, which means that the different models achieve the same accuracy level, even with different confusion matrices in some cases. Furthermore, there's a graphical representation that illustrates the relationship between the accuracy level and the data sets. In the next slide, based on the precision factor, the best model for the first data set is decision tree, for the second data set is logistic regression, and for the last data set is decision tree and support vector machine. Here again, the graphical representation demonstrates the relationship between the precision level and the data sets. In the next slide, based on the recall factor, the best performing models are different for each data set. And here, again, the graphical representation shows the relationship between the recall level and the data set, since the vertical axis represents the recall factor and horizontal axis represents the data set. Main findings, as a result, in all these three cases, the best models can differ across the data sets according to the factors that I consider for the evaluation phase. And ensemble methods, including random forest, bagging, and boosting, generally achieve the best overall performance. And different models can achieve the same accuracy while producing the different confusion matrices. And conclusion, dataset characteristics strongly influence model performance. Ensemble learning methods are effective for medical prediction, and model selection should consider both predictive performance and the dataset characteristics. Another key point which is relevant to my analysis is the importance of binary classification, because after all the experiments that I have done for this research, I obtained this result that this method is applicable for the medical data sets, and it's possible to obtain the better results with this method, since it reflects the reality and the real issues in the life. And I conclude my speech here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Prossimo candidato Alessandro Redi, che discute con la professoressa.
Il candidato ha svolto una tesi in cui effettua uno studio sugli indicatori del benessere equo e sostenibile in Italia, analizzando appunto le regioni italiane e classificandole rispetto a questi indicatori. Prego Alessandro, ci illustri la sua tesi.
Buon pomeriggio a tutti, ringrazio la Commissione per la parola e la professoressa Simona Balzano per il supporto in questo percorso. Oggi vi presento la mia tesi dal titolo Un'analisi statistica degli indicatori di benessere equo e sostenibile in Italia. L'idea alla base di questo lavoro è semplice ma fondamentale: superare la semplice lettura dei dati economici per capire davvero come si vive oggi in Italia, creando una mappa chiara e aggiornata delle vere differenze tra i nostri territori. Per oltre 50 anni il PIL è stato utilizzato come unico metro per misurare lo sviluppo e il livello di civiltà di un paese. Il livello di civiltà di un paese. Eppure già il suo stesso ideatore Simon Kuznets aveva avvertito che misurare lo sviluppo di un paese e il benessere di un paese attraverso un solo numero contabile è riduttivo, in quanto il PIL va ad ignorare i danni all'ambiente e inoltre non ci dice come è distribuita la ricchezza. Seguendo queste idee, l'Italia ha fatto un grande passo in avanti creando il BES, il Framework del benessere equo e sostenibile, sviluppato da Istat e CNL. Questo sistema non guarda solo all'economia, ma si basa su 12 dimensioni fondamentali come salute, lavoro, relazioni sociali, ambiente e molto altro. La cosa più importante però è che questi indicatori sono stati non sono più solo una semplice statistica, ma sono stati inseriti all'interno del DEF, nel documento di economia e finanza. E quindi il governo, quando va a effettuare una riforma, è obbligato per legge a calcolare non solo l'impatto sul debito pubblico, ma anche gli effetti reali sulla qualità della vita dei cittadini. Gestire dati come quelli del BES però è una vera sfida, in quanto parliamo di oltre 150 indicatori sparsi per 20 regioni. Ho spaziato da dati oggettivi come la salute, il tasso di occupazione, il reddito medio disponibile, la percentuale di laureati, fino a misure di innovazione e sostenibilità come la quota di raccolta differenziata oppure, ad esempio, il numero di addetti alla ricerca. Ho incluso fattori legati alla sicurezza con il tasso di furti in abitazione, senza trascurare però la percezione soggettiva dei cittadini misurata attraverso la soddisfazione per la vita, per il paesaggio e per i mezzi di trasporto pubblico. Successivamente, lavorare con un set di dati del genere ha richiesto però un passaggio matematico preliminare, in quanto ho dovuto standardizzare innanzitutto questi dati perché dovevo lavorare con grandezze estremamente diverse tra loro, come ad esempio un valore in euro, una percentuale, un'età anagrafica. Successivamente sono andato ad applicare la cluster analysis o la classificazione automatica, che è una tecnica statistica che serve a unire i soggetti, in questo caso le regioni, in gruppi molto simili al loro interno ma molto diversi gli uni dagli altri. Si va poi a calcolare la distanza matematica tra questi gruppi. Tra le varie tecniche disponibili ho scelto di utilizzare il metodo gerarchico di Word, che è stata una scelta tecnica ben precisa, in quanto molti algoritmi tendono a soffrire del cosiddetto effetto catena, ovvero vanno a unire le regioni creando un unico grande gruppo confuso. Con il metodo di Word invece questa unione avviene solo se crea il minor disordine possibile all'interno del gruppo. Dal punto di vista statistico va a minimizzare l'aumento della varianza interna. Questo mi ha consentito di ottenere gruppi stabili, compatti e molto ben definiti. I risultati di questi calcoli possiamo vederli all'interno del dendrogramma, che è un grafico ad albero in cui le regioni si fondono progressivamente. L'altezza dei rami indica quanto due regioni sono distanti tra loro dal punto di vista del benessere. Osservando dove questa distanza diventava troppo ampia ho deciso dove tagliare l'albero. Ho così individuato 4 cluster. Il cluster 1, che è quello più grande e comprende le 10 regioni del centro-nord ed è l'Italia trainante. È caratterizzato da un benessere molto solido, infatti qui la speranza di vita sfiora gli 84 anni e le persone partecipano attivamente alla vita politica. Siamo al 54,4%. Invece il cluster 2 isola Trentino, Alto Adige e Valle d'Aosta, in quello che possiamo definirlo un modello montano. Queste due regioni rappresentano un'eccellenza assoluta per l'ambiente e per l'efficienza nei servizi. Sono caratterizzate infatti da raccolti da tassi di raccolta differenziati altissimi e inoltre le persone apprezzano molto i trasporti pubblici. Non a caso questo è il gruppo con il benessere soggettivo in assoluto più alto d'Italia. Il cluster 3 rappresenta forse la scoperta più interessante, in quanto l'algoritmo ha isolato il Lazio da solo. Da un lato il Lazio rappresenta il cuore della conoscenza in quanto ha la più alta percentuale di laureati in Italia, circa il 37%, e moltissimi ricercatori. Questa eccellenza però va a scontrarsi con i problemi della vita di tutti i giorni tipici delle grandi metropoli. Possiamo vedere come l'insoddisfazione per i servizi è enorme, con l'apprezzamento per i trasporti pubblici che crolla da appena il 13,6%. Infine abbiamo il cluster 4 che raggruppa le 7 regioni del sud e delle isole. E purtroppo i dati che derivano da questo cluster confermano che il divario esiste ancora. Infatti il problema di partenza del sud è proprio il mercato del lavoro, con un'occupazione ferma al 55%. La mancanza di lavoro genera un altro fenomeno grave, la fuga dei talenti. Infatti al sud ci sono pochi laureati, ma non perché i giovani non studiano, ma perché dopo aver ottenuto la laurea sono costretti ad andare via per cercare nuove opportunità. Questo elaborato ci dimostra come valutare lo stato di salute di un paese guardando solo alla ricchezza economica è un errore, in quanto il benessere è un organismo complesso fatto di ospedali, istruzione, ambiente, servizi. Dalla mia cluster analysis vediamo un'Italia con sfumature diverse. Utilizzare dati come quelli del BES permette a chi governa di avere un quadro chiaro di ogni territorio e quindi di non fare leggi generiche, ma di andare a intervenire in maniera mirata ed efficace. Vi ringrazio per l'attenzione.
Il prossimo candidato è Rocco Ricci, che discute una tesi con la professoressa Balzani.
Ciao Rocco.
Benvenuto.
Buonasera Rocco. Rocco ha svolto una tesi in statistica sull'intelligenza artificiale che adesso ci presenterà.
Ok, ma guarderò solo voi, Ok, sì. Buongiorno Presidente. gentili componenti della Commissione, gentile Commissione. Viviamo in un'epoca in cui noi prendiamo delle decisioni con l'aiuto della tecnologia, spesso senza neppure rendercene conto. Quando noi vogliamo acquistare dei prodotti online, vogliamo fare delle ricerche su internet, vogliamo utilizzare il navigatore, vogliamo ricevere un suggerimento di un film da guardare, dietro tutte queste azioni lavora l'intelligenza artificiale. Questa presenza così forte davanti a tutti voi mi ha portato a riflettere su una domanda molto semplice. Come fa una macchina a prendere decisioni così intelligenti che sembrano così intelligenti? In realtà la risposta è una sola. Nessuna macchina può diventare intelligente da sola, perché dietro ogni algoritmo si nascondono dei dati che sono molto importanti. Se devono essere analizzati, interpretati e soprattutto organizzati, perché se no da soli non sono utili questi dati. Sì, allora, molto spesso la statistica viene considerata solo come una materia fatta di numeri e formule, ma in realtà non è così. Perché? Io mi chiedo perché non è così? Allora, perché la statistica è un insieme di probabilità, un insieme di possibilità, un insieme di eventi certi e eventi impossibili. Per esempio, ho spiegato anche la differenza tra statistica descrittiva e statistica inferenziale. Come abbiamo fatto degli esempi concreti, come Amazon, PayPal, Zara. Per esempio, facciamo l'esempio di Zara. Zara lo troviamo non solo qua in Italia, ma anche nei paesi esteri e non solo in Europa e in Asia, insomma un po' da tutte le parti. Inoltre ho analizzato anche i limiti dell'intelligenza artificiale, evidenziando quanto sia importante la qualità dei dati e il controllo umano rimanga sempre fondamentale, rimanga sempre importante, molto importante. In fondo, il messaggio che ho voluto trasmettere è proprio questo. Dai numeri nascono i dati, dai dati nascono le informazioni e dalle informazioni nascono gli algoritmi e gli algoritmi possono servire a far prendere alle persone decisioni migliori collaborando tutti insieme. Grazie per l'attenzione.
Next candidate is Jean Konjir Bakhtov. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. He's discussing the thesis with Professor Matthias Eller.
Thank you, Mr. President. The candidate developed a thesis on the legal protection of foreign investors in Uzbekistan, that is his home jurisdiction, after the 22 economic reforms. It is a thesis in private law, and it deals with the guarantees and challenges of such legal protection. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor. Good afternoon, President and members of the committee. My name is Jahangir Bakhtov, and I will present my thesis, Legal Protection of Foreign Investors in Uzbekistan after 2022 Economic Reforms, Private Law Currents and Challenges, supervised by Professor Alberto Matias Serafim. So my question is simple, but has a consequential side. Since Uzbekistan launched its most ambitious reform program in 2022, how much real protection does private law actually give foreign investors? And first of all, I want to introduce Uzbekistan indicates one of the most closed economies in post-Soviet Russian. Reforms after 2016 opens door to the foreign capital in 2022 market further more systematic step. For example, for the new Uzbekistan development strategy targeted $8 to $10 billion in our FDI by 2026. Backed by accelerated privatization, expanded special economic zone systems, and 2023 constitutional guarantees for property and WTO accession in December 2023. My research question is how successful have these reforms been offering foreign investor protections through private law? I'll break into the 4 sub-questions. First of all, what guarantees exist and how they changed? How they compare with international standards, what structural problems limit them, and what policy changes could close the gap between law on paper and in practice. First of all, analytical framework. My core methodological contribution is 5 criteria effectiveness framework applied to 7 guarantees categories. First, national treatment, property rights, anti-expropriation safeguards, stabilization clauses, profit repatriation, investment agreements, and dispute resolutions. Each is scored on legal existence and forms mechanisms, institutional reliability, aligned with international standards, and investors' accessibility, built on Douglas North's distinction between formal rules and informal constraints. So, key findings as effectiveness scorecard. This is the central finding of my thesis. Every one of the 7 categories scores adequate or strong on the legal existence on alignment with international standards. Legislative work has generally been done. But institutional reliability is weak in 5 of the 7 categories, and informs mechanism is weak in the 3. I call this formal convergence without institutional delivery. The law says the right things, but the courts and administration behind are not reliable enough to make those guarantees count in practice. So I have some examples about my thesis. 2 investor states episodes illustrate this gap. Oxus Gold and UK mining company alleges that its Uzbek joint venture was stripped of the value through dilution and administration abstractions without any foreign nationalizations. It was the UK-Uzbekistan bid, not domestic law, that gives its road to remedy, exposing what I call the indirect expropriation gap in domestic legislation. The second case, the most interesting, the Russia MTS lost through $1 billion when the license was revoked amid a bribery scheme, ultimately paying like $850 billion penalties in the US. MTS never even challenged the revocation in Uzbek courts, consistent with findings that investors see no independent domestic forum to rely on against the state. So I want to conclude and give some recommendations for my thesis. My answers to research the question, the 2022 reforms are necessary but not sufficient step. The legislative architecture is now broadly sound. What's missing is institutional reliability. I propose the 5 recommendations. First, judicial reform with the specialist investments dispute form. Second one, codifying and limiting investor registration, publishing comprehensive negative list of investment restriction, explicitly defining indirect expropriation in domestic law, and sustained multi-year institutional capacity building program with partners like World Bank, ABRD, OSD, and Unicas. So I want to close my thesis with, in short, Uzbekistan makes the easiest part of the investment climate reform, writing good law, but after in Uzbekistan there is they need to face the most hardest part, which is building institutions that make the law reliable. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Grazie, abbiamo completato con i laureandi delle lauree triennali, passiamo alle lauree magistrali. First candidate is Gulnaz Ibrahimova. She has written a thesis under my supervision on the last two policies adopted in Italy to fight poverty. And she developed a comparison. You have 10 minutes to present your results. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I open it? Do I have to open the presentation or does it start? Okay. Okay.
Just to go to the presentation.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gulnaz, and my thesis is titled From Universal to Categorical, evaluating the shift from reddito di cittadinanza to assegno di inclusione and its implications for poverty targeting in Italy. In short, I set out to answer a straightforward question. When Italy replaced one anti-poverty program with another, did the poorest household end up better or worse protected? The answer, as I'll show you, is unambiguously worse, and the reasons why are important for Italian social policy going forward. Here's the short presentation outline. Let me start with a bit of context. Italy was among the last countries in European Union to adopt minimum wage policy, and until 2018 there was no national minimum scheme or whatsoever, and this only changed in 2018 with the reddito di inclusione, a modest first step. Then in 2019 the incoming government introduced the reddito di cittadinanza, or RDC, a maximum benefit of 780 euros per month available to any low-income household, regardless of its composition, covering 1.65 million households nationwide. And in January 2024, the RDC was replaced by ADI, or Assegno di Inclusione. And this is where my thesis begins, because ADI is not simply a revised version of the RDC, it's a structurally different program built on a different logic. So the key change is, while the RDC was quasi-universal, available to any household earning below the income threshold, the ADI is categorical, meaning it restricts eligibility to a household containing at least one member who is a minor, or someone over 60, disabled person, or in a certified condition of social disadvantage. And working adults without dependents are excluded entirely. And they are redirected to a separate measure called SFL, which provides only 500 euros per month and for a maximum of 1 year. So the research questions. I structure my empirical analysis on 3 main research questions. First, does the ADI improve or worsen targeting efficiency compared to RDC? Second, what are the distributional consequences of the reform? How does it affect poverty and inequality? And third, do these effects vary geographically? And if so, which regions bear the greatest burden? And to answer these questions, I used 2025 weave of the Bank of Italy survey on household income and wealth, which covers 9,600 nationally representative households. The methodology is a static microsimulation, meaning I apply both sets of eligibility rules to the same population under RDC and ADI. And this isolates the effect of the policy design change from any other economic or demographic shifts. So presenting you the results, my first finding is on coverage. Under the RDC simulation, 1,650,000 households are eligible, and under ADI it falls to 1.17 million, a reduction of almost 30%, or roughly 480,000 households losing access to income support entirely. And the most striking case is working age adults without dependents, because under the ADC, 68.5% of poor households in this group received support, and under the ADI, the figure drops to 0. The second result, the consequences for poverty are severe. So, RDC lifts 35% of pre-transfer poor households above the absolute poverty line, and the ADI lifts only 25.1%. So the gap is 10.5%. And in population terms, it means that roughly 170,000 households remain in poverty under the new regulations. But what's more interesting is when we look at the FGT indices, Foster, Greer, Thorbecke, the poverty gap, or how far below the poverty line the poor actually are, is 72% larger under the ADI compared to RDC. This tells us it's not marginal cases that are left behind, but the poorest layers of the population. And the third result focuses on targeting. The government justified the ADI on the grounds that it would improve targeting, meaning there would be no leakages, directing resources more precisely to the household who are genuinely in need. But my data shows the opposite. The leakage rate, the share of recipients who are not actually poor, rises from 0.8% under the RDC to 17.3% under the ADI. Why? Because the categorical gate admits non-poor elderly homeowners who qualify under relaxed asset thresholds, while simultaneously excluding poor working age adults who simply don't belong to a protected demographic category under the new scheme. And the last result focuses on household types. Breaking this down by household type reinforces the finding. The elderly-only categories see coverage rise by over 24 percentage points. Households with disabled members also gain, but mixed households, those with a protected member alongside non-protected adults, actually lose the coverage by over 20 points. And last but not least, geographically speaking, this burden is not distributed evenly within the country. In the south, where poverty is already 3 times higher than in the north, coverage falls by nearly 14 percentage points, and the poverty headcount rises by over 2 points. In the north, by contrast, coverage actually increases slightly, driven by elderly homeowners who benefit from the relaxed asset ceiling. And we can say that ADA amplifies Italy's already existing territorial divide. To summarize my 3 findings on targeting, the ADI is less efficient And the CGH index falls from 15 to 13, and leakage surges from 0.8 to 17.3%. On poverty reduction, the reform's capacity to lift households above the poverty line falls by 10.5 percentage points. And on geography, the cost is concentrated in the south, the region that can least afford it. And what should follow from this? Identify 4 specific policy implications. The most urgent is extending at least a minimum income floor to working age adults. Even a strictly conditional one would address the reform's most acute gap. The second is fixing the equivalence scale, which currently penalizes mixed household by excluding working age members from the benefit calculation. Third, a regional compensation mechanism for the mezzogiorno, which cannot be activation measured out of structural employment. And fourth, raising the SFL to a genuinely livable level with a longer duration. And to finalize, the transition from the reddito di cittadinanza to the assegno di inclusione has weakened Italy's minimum income system at the point where it matters most, its ability to reach the poorest members of the society. 170,000 households remain in poverty that the RDC would have lifted out. Leakage has risen 20-fold, and the South bears the disproportionate share of the cost. And these are not just small adjustments, they are the consequences of a fundamental redesign that conflates employment potential with geographic category, and in doing so, leaves Italy's most vulnerable households unprotected. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Il prossimo candidato è Sara Bruni, che discute una tesi con la professoressa Cozzo.
Ringrazio Presidente. La candidata ha affrontato il tema della rendicontazione della sostenibilità nell'ambito della pubblica amministrazione. Noi sappiamo che i framework attualmente presenti sono rivolti ovviamente al settore privato e quindi questo gap normativo, la realtà del decano, come la pubblica amministrazione corrisponde a queste pressioni che vengono proprio dalla rendicontazione di sostenibilità. Chiederei di sintetizzare i principali risultati.
Grazie. Buon pomeriggio a tutti. L'obiettivo del presente lavoro di tesi è analizzare come le amministrazioni regionali italiane stiano affrontando il tema della rendicontazione della sostenibilità, in un contesto in cui, a differenza del settore privato, non esistono obblighi normativi specifici. Da qui nasce la seguente domanda di ricerca, ovvero, in assenza di obblighi normativi, in che modo stanno rispondendo gli enti pubblici alle crescenti richieste di rendicontazione della sostenibilità? Per rispondere a tale interrogativo, il lavoro si articola in 3 parti. Un inquadramento teorico con l'analisi delle principali asimmetrie tra settore privato e settore pubblico, segue poi una metodologia con la scelta della proxy di analisi e infine un'analisi empirica con la seguente discussione dei risultati. Partendo dall'inquadramento teorico è importante evidenziare le principali differenze tra aziende private e enti pubblici. Le aziende private hanno un orientamento strutturato verso il mercato, dove l'obiettivo primario rimane la generazione di valore economico e dunque la creazione di profitto. Le aziende private sono soggette a obblighi normativi sulla sostenibilità sempre più stringenti, come la NFRD e la più recente CSRD. Al contrario, gli enti pubblici rispondono ad una logica del tutto differente. Essi infatti sono orientati all'erogazione di servizi e all'erogazione dell'utilità sociale per la collettività. Dunque, come abbiamo già anticipato, non esistono obblighi normativi diretti e specifici per la sostenibilità negli enti pubblici. Difatti, la rendicontazione è finalizzata al principio di trasparenza e al principio di pareggio di bilancio. Da queste differenze nascono 3 domande di ricerca fondamentali nel nostro lavoro, ovvero se è possibile misurare la disclosure di sostenibilità nel settore pubblico regionale, con quali strumenti è possibile farlo e qual è l'attuale livello di trasparenza di sostenibilità nel settore pubblico regionale. Per analizzare ciò, la metodologia utilizzata è un'analisi empirica e comparativa delle 20 regioni italiane. Viene utilizzata la strategia regionale per lo sviluppo sostenibile come proxy per valutare il loro grado di trasparenza. Infatti, in assenza di standard normativi obbligatori, la scelta di utilizzare tale strumento rappresenta un allineamento volontario di ogni singola regione alle direttive globali dell'Agenda 2030. Una delle parti più delicate del lavoro è stato quello di individuare un indicatore comune. Dunque, a causa dell'assenza di bilanci di sostenibilità omogenei all'interno delle regioni, ho scelto di individuare un indicatore alternativo uniforme, ovvero la strategia di sviluppo sostenibile. La strategia, di fatti, è un documento ufficiale attraverso cui la regione formalizza la visione di medio e lungo periodo e i propri obiettivi. Per mappare la situazione italiana, gli indicatori utilizzati sono stati 2, ovvero la presenza o l'assenza della strategia regionale per lo sviluppo sostenibile e l'anno di inizio adozione della strategia sul territorio per analizzare anche l'impatto temporale di tale fenomeno. Passiamo adesso ai risultati. Dalla mappatura vediamo come 18 regioni su 20 hanno adottato una strategia regionale per lo sviluppo sostenibile. Solamente 2 regioni, ovvero il Molise e la Basilicata, non adottano formalmente tale documento. È da precisare però che ciò non significa per forza una mancanza di attenzione verso i temi della sostenibilità, ma può dipendere da fattori organizzativi o dall'introduzione della sostenibilità all'interno di altri piani. Andando a analizzare anche la distribuzione temporale, notiamo una forte accelerazione di queste adozioni di strategie di sviluppo sostenibile dal 2021 al 2023. Questo andamento è dovuto dal fatto che viene introdotta in quegli anni l'Agenda 2030 e viene sviluppata la Strategia Nazionale per lo Sviluppo Sostenibile. Questi hanno in qualche modo condizionato le regioni a sensibilizzarsi sui temi della sostenibilità e dunque ad adottare degli strumenti di sviluppo sostenibile. Passiamo adesso alle risposte delle domande di ricerca poste precedentemente. Possiamo dunque rispondere alla prima domanda di ricerca dicendo che sì, è possibile misurare la disclosure pubblica anche in assenza di standard normativi unici e specifici, come la CSRD, purché l'analisi si basi su fonti ufficiali pubbliche e istituzionalizzate e purché si faccia affidamento su strumenti alternativi rispetto agli strumenti classici. Da qui passiamo alla risposta alla seconda domanda di ricerca, dove appunto possiamo dire che la strategia di sviluppo sostenibile si è dimostrato un ottimo strumento efficace come proxy metodologica della disclosure strategica, con i 2 indicatori operativi della variabile dicotomica e della dimensione temporale. Come ultimo punto possiamo rispondere alla terza domanda di ricerca dicendo che il livello di disclosure in Italia è dunque elevato ma non uniforme. Abbiamo visto che 18 regioni su 20 adottano una strategia regionale per lo sviluppo sostenibile, ma rimangono comunque delle differenze nei tempi di adozione. In conclusione, la ricerca ha consentito di evidenziare come il settore pubblico regionale italiano, dunque, abbia sviluppato forme significative di disclosure di sostenibilità, anche in assenza di obblighi normativi diretti. Dunque la sostenibilità sta diventando sempre più un aspetto centrale, anche nei processi di programmazione e comunicazione delle amministrazioni regionali. La nostra ricerca ha comunque 2 limiti, ovvero è un'analisi focalizzata esclusivamente sul territorio italiano e sulle regioni, quindi non prende in considerazione altre tipologie di enti pubblici come province, comuni e città metropolitane. Si tratta inoltre di un'analisi di tipo esplorativo, né quantitativo né statistico. Questa scelta metodologica è dovuta dal fatto che si tratta di un fenomeno ancora poco studiato e dalla limitata disponibilità di dati e informazioni accessibili. Quindi si tratta di una prima base empirica per studi futuri. Grazie a tutti per l'attenzione.
Grazie. Domanda. Next candidate is Mona Kendi. Discusses with Professor Giammetti.
Thank you. I would like to start by thanking my family and friends and my supervisor, Professor Giometi. My topic is on brain drain in developed economies, globalization's impact on domestic innovation capacity. Mostly when we think of brain drain, we think of developing countries. And there's a new trend that I realized needs to be looked into in developed countries in terms of brain drain, because in developed countries we mostly consider brain circulation. So my research problem is, how does the brain drain of highly skilled professionals impact the domestic innovative capacity of developed economies with respect to a high level of globalization? So the objectives are analyzing the impact that brain drain has on the capacity of domestic innovation of developed economies, mapping the key trends and sectoral concentration of skilled immigration in developed economies. The economies that I concentrated on are the United States, United Kingdom, Italy, and Germany. And the sectors that I concentrated on are biotechnology, engineering. Then the third objective is assessing how the flow of skilled migration affects the diffusion of knowledge and absorption capabilities within the systems of national innovation. So for the literature review, the evolution of brain drain concept is traced from origins as a challenge for developing nations, but it's now a manifestation as a silent concern for advanced economies. The research gaps we have a void in understanding of global talent mobility and impact that it has on advanced economies. Studies done on skilled migration have often relied on national level data that are often confined to qualitative and small-scale studies done on specific professions. So currently the data that is available for developed economies, it is not focusing on the areas that it should focus on, where brain drain is currently happening in the highlighted sectors that I just mentioned. So there's a need to focus specifically on these four research areas. Then most of the literature on brain drain was developed for currencies in developing nations and do not apply to developed nations due to the obvious sectoral differences and difference in economies. Then we have the theoretical framework. The first one is diffusion and absorption framework. That is the diffusion of knowledge and absorption of this knowledge, applying it to the systems in economies. Then we have endogenous growth and human capital. We have the national innovation systems approach, which is collaboration of firms, companies, and governments. Then so for the research methodology, my research design, collecting and analyzing qualitative and quantitative data. Then I had a sample population for skilled immigrants in the four economies earlier mentioned, and specifically in the four sectors I mentioned earlier, that is engineering, biotechnology. Then we have data collection methods, quantitative data, which was mainly collected from the available data from the OECD and World Bank. Then qualitative data from my sample population. Then, and the population mentioned is professionals who have immigrated from their home countries to other countries, specifically for this research. Then we have quantitative research results. So the first figure is from Italy, the minimum figure for foreign inflows, and the maximum figure from Germany. This was between 2012 and to 2023, accumulative total of all the years. So there's a great standard deviation, as you can see at the end, for the foreign inflows. This was mainly due to the disruptions caused by COVID, which caused instability for most economies, even for developed nations. Then Tertiary enrollment, those are gross figures, again, for the four economies. For the tertiary enrollment, we do not have a very big standard deviation as for the foreign inflows. But again, it's worth to note that for higher education is one of the main reasons there is immigration. Then there's migration change rate now for the foreign inflows and tertiary enrollment. Then the qualitative research results. So one of the questions for the questionnaires that I issued was which option best describes your reason to emigrate? And the biggest percentage, that is 45%, was compensation and career progression. Most felt that the pay they were getting in their home countries, they could earn better in other economies. Then the key findings, so brain drain in developed economies exhibits selective concentration in innovation critical sectors. The primary drivers of skilled immigration from developed economies are structural deficits in innovation infrastructure. That is where they feel that in their home countries, they do not have the required infrastructures to maybe conduct research in their field. Then for the last one, we have diaspora knowledge flows, which remain insufficient to compensate for the loss of absorptive capacity. So discussion, I have the theoretical implications and contribution. Findings necessitate redefinition of globalization's role in innovation systems rather than the brain circulation narrative. Again, to highlight brain drain should not be confused with brain circulation, especially for developed economies, because I realized from this research that brain circulation is where there is exchange of information, but does not mean they move permanently. But for brain drain, they do move permanently or long-term to these countries, and this is happening even for developed nations. Then we have policy implications and recommendations. Immigration policy should be redefined as an innovation policy. Immigration policies currently are, I would say, favorable in developed economies among its citizens, but it should also look into how it's affecting innovation in their home countries. Then the limitations of the study. Quantitative analysis relied on country-level aggregate data because there's currently no information that is focusing only on the mentioned sectors. Then the questionnaires captured the specialist perspectives only at single points, and it is unable to capture how they started their journey in immigration to where they are to date. So there's need to analyze over longer periods of time what happens if there's integration into the current economies where they are, into the countries they moved into, what are the impacts. Then the future research, micro-level data sets that track individual researcher movements could provide more precise estimates. Qualitative research following skilled immigrants over 5 to 10 years would reveal whether diaspora ties diminish over time as immigrants integrate. Conclusion, the fracturing of knowledge diffusion networks. This is whereby when immigration occurs and they do not go back to their home countries, or there is no link in any way with their home countries, there is a risk of losing these specialists and the knowledge they have. Then there is depletion of absorption capacity. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next candidate, again discussing with Professor Giammetti, is Amanullah Oriakai.
Thank you, members of committee, and especially special thanks to Professor Jamiti for his support throughout this journey. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Amanullah Uriakhil, and I'm pleased to present my thesis entitled "The Exposure of Global Value Chain to Geopolitical Tension." So the purpose of my result is to know whether the geopolitical tension influences countries' participation in global value chains, and focusing on backward and forward participation. Modern production has gone through global value chains where different stages of production takes place across multiple countries. For example, a phone may cross different borders to reach the final consumer. This system has improved efficiency and international integrations. However, recent events such as COVID-19, US-China trade war, Russia and Ukraine conflict raised questions about resilience. This led to my research question: how do geopolitical risk and economic uncertainty affect countries' participation in global value chains? There is extensive research on global value chains, and also there is a growing research on geopolitical risk and economic uncertainty. However, these researchers have largely developed separately. My thesis addresses these gaps by examining both topics together while distinguishing between backward GVC participation and forward GVC participation. I constructed a balanced panel data set of 15 countries covering the period of 2005 to 2020, giving 240 observations. The data for GVC came from OECD TIWA dataset, and while for geopolitical risk and uncertainty, the data, it was measured through Global Geopolitical Risk Index and World Uncertainty Index. If GDP, trade openness, and FDI were added as control variables, and separate pooled regressions were estimated. The results suggest that geopolitical risk was not significant in either models, at least in my samples and the study period. Economic uncertainty, however, was positive and significant only in backward GVC. GDP was positive in backward GVC, and the trade openness was the strongest determinant among all the variables in backward GVC participation. If the I was the same, it was not significant in either of the studies. Again, it's only in the sample and the data set that I have chosen and the study period from 2005 to 2020. So the key findings suggest that geopolitical tensions do not necessarily reduce participation. Instead, firms and countries adopt their strategies instead of withdrawing from global value chains. Contribution implications are, this study contributes by analyzing jointly geopolitical risk and economic uncertainty, and this study suggests the strengthening resilience, diversifications, and flexibility. While there is also some limitation of this study, where I used country-level data instead of a sector-level data, and also I used global GPR index instead of country-level. Pooled panel regression is used, so therefore the study shows association instead of causality. So the main findings is that the countries do not geopolitical risks do not necessarily affect countries' participation in GVC. Instead, they adopt their strategies and adopt their strategies instead of leaving the GVC completely. Thank you, everybody, for your attention.
Thank you. Next candidate is Rajul Rai, discussing again with Professor Giammetti.
Good morning, respected members of the committee and guests. My name is Rajul Rai, and today I would like to present my thesis, Structural GVC Exposure and Economic Vulnerability, a sectoral analysis across the Indian economy via ICIU framework. Now, what are the challenges with the beyond gross trades? The first basic challenges we face is the double counting issue. To begin, why do traditional metrics fall short? Standard trade states record total gross flows, which cause a double counting issue. Whenever intermediate inputs cross borders multiple times, this masks the true domestic value generated and hides structural dependencies. Now, what are the methodological framework which we use to calculate that how much our Indian economy or any other country economy is dependent? So we use two models, Leontief model and decomposition, and there is one more model, Koopman's decomposition model, the full name of decomposition model. So with the Leontief input-output model, which allows you to trace both direct and indirect ripple effects across the sectors. If we talk about the Koopman decomposition model, this breaks down total trade into foreign value added and domestic value added, giving us a precise look at foreign supply resilience. Now, if we talk about what are the backward participation, what can be the worst situation if our country heavily depends on backward participation, what can be the situations? So first, if we talk about this entire thesis is made on the Indian economy. Indian economy suffered heavily when it comes to chemical products because, as you can see, it's 36.4% FVA, which is foreign value added. Now, whenever industry is heavily dependent on outside countries, whenever there is a global crisis, that particular sector suffers a lot, which we can see in the terms of chemical products. Next is textile and apparels, which almost falls around 18%. The other one is mining and quarrying, which again almost falls around 12%. The next is total services, which again falls around 9.6%. Agriculture, you see, it's just 3.9%. And the reason is India is very strong when it comes to domestic supplies of agriculture, as we produce most of the things in India, which shows that highly dependence on foreign market can give a high downside and can hit a profit as high as. Now, if we talk about what are the vulnerabilities of upstreams and downstreams. Upstream resources intensive like agriculture and mining. You see, if there is a high sensitive to demand changes, these industries with upstreams can be high sensitive to demand changes, but very low supply side disruptions as these particular industries don't import so many goods. If we talk about midstreams, you see moderate exposures to border frictions. If we talk about the downstreams, manufacturing like chemicals faces extreme supply risk due to tight just-in-time dependencies. If I am running a complex chemical industry and if I want to import something as quick as possible, and if there is some global crisis going on, my industry and my entire factory is going to hit a loss. If I talk about domestic anchored, lower direct structural leakage through still subject to entire domestic effects. Now let's talk about how dependencies has made companies fall into problems when it was the time of COVID-19. This was the real pandemic stress test for every companies. When global supply chains halted, sectors like chemicals with over 36% FVA suffered severe cascade failures, causing by missing lower tier foreign inputs. The takeaway is very clear. During simultaneous global shocks, reliance drops as backward GVC participations rise. As much as we are dependent on foreign goods, we are always going to fall short with our own companies. Now, what are the strategic policies recommendations? My thesis has been, these are the findings of my thesis, that what can be the possible strategic recommendations. First, and the very most important thing is diversification, sourcing diversification. It's a thumb rule that whenever you are dependent on just one company, just one supplier, it's always going to be a problem. The moment that company is going to be into a problem, it is going to affect your supply chain, it is going to affect your profits, and then everything is going to be messed. The second one is strategic domestic capacity. Build domestic manufacture buffer for essential intermediate components rather than forcing purely on cost minimization. Most of the countries, most of the time, they think that if we import something, it is going to cost us less, but not every time this is true. If we try to, even if the cost rise of our product, if we are self-sufficient on the time of global crisis, we are self-aware and we are self-reliant. Real-time monitoring. Deploy ICIU-based tracking systems to identify what are the fragile supply nodes earlier. What are the regional integration? Focus on shorter, near-shore regional values chains to reduce geopolitical and global transportations. This simply means if I am in India, I want something from US, it is going to take a lot of time. But if I make my allies, if I make the deals with the near around Asia, it's going to be far more easy for me in times of geopolitical pressures, situations. Now, to wrap up with, while global value chains have driven economic growth, deep backward participations and integrations create critical vulnerabilities during foreign shocks. By understanding sector-specific exposures and shifting towards strategic diversification and regional reliances, India can better safeguard, and any country can better safeguard its economy against future global disruptions. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Thank you and namaste.
Thank you. Next and last candidate is Betelem Gitayeu, again with Professor Giametti.
Okay, thank you everyone. I want to praise God for this moment, and also I would like to thank my advisor for Giametti for his guidance. Also, I want to thank all of my friends and families who's here to support me. So my master's thesis title is African Continental Free Trade Era as a Reconfigurational a Network Analysis of Commercial Centrality and Vulnerability in Intra-Africa Trade. So my research examined the structure of intra-Africa trade before the implementation of African Continental Free Trade Era. So I investigate whether countries who have occupy in central position also have more diversified export concentration. So rather than evaluating African Continental Free Trade Era, I established a pre-African Continental Free Trade Era for future benchmarks and okay. So when I began the research problem, well, AFCFTA was established in 2021, and they promise diversification and structural transformation, projecting a 3.4 trillion single market for 1.3 billion of people, which is for all of Africans. And the concept view assumes trade liberalization benefit accrue evenly, but this overlooks deep structural asymmetry already embedded in African trade, because some of African countries already have more economics and more connection than others, so they don't have equal trade liberalization. And also some studies argue structuralism and dependency theory warn that regional integration can reproduce center-periphery dynamics with industrialized member acting as a sub-imperial hubs. So one of my general objective is to examine
whether trade network centrality is associated with export diversification among African countries during the pre-AFC-FTA period. So when we see the specific objectives, I begin with constructing the intra-Africa trade network for starting from 2050 to 2019 and identify the core and peripheral country using network centrality measurements and to measure export concentration using the HHI. So the main research question is, does a country's structural position in intra-Africa trade network predict how diversified or concentrated its exports to African partners are? So I began with staying with two hypotheses, and my first hypothesis predicts that pre-AFC-FTA or intra-Africa trade is organized hierarchically with a small core of dominant economics and a large peripheries. And the second hypothesis predicts that countries that occupy more central network position will show symmetrically low concentration, export concentration. So my study combined these three theoretical perspectives: structuralism, dependency theory, and network analysis. And when we see structuralism, they argue that global economics is hierarchically. So industrialized center versus primary producing periphery. So trade composition, not just a volume, determining development outcome. So not having too much trade, also depending on development economics. And when we see dependency theory, they emphasize underdevelopment is actively produced. So regional integration can create sub-imperial centers, more industrialized members, may replicate core periphery dynamic within Africa. And network analysis also combine these two theories and will allow us to measure the structure of intra-Africa trade network analysis, also review systematic priorities like betweenness, ignivector centralities, core periphery structure invisible to aggregate statistics. So the data and methodology. So the data come from UN Comtrade bilateral trade flow for 53 African countries with the period of 2050-2019 average. So this is the pre-AFC-FTA baseline. And I use HS two-digit product level, 97 categories for export concentration, which is HHI, and World Bank for GDP per capita and population control. So the method first, I constructed directed weighted network graph, and then I calculated between a significator to identify countries that act sub-intermediaries and eigenvector centrality to measure influences. And also finally, I estimate Wallace regression to see the relationship between central position and between the centrality and export concentration. So what I use, why I use 2050-2019 is because of reduced short-term fluctuation and establish a stable pre-AFC-FTA baseline. So when we see the first finding is the network structure. When we see the descriptive findings for 53 African countries and 1,490 trade links were included in the network. And trade, when we see the networks, trade is highly unequal. So with large difference in trade value and export concentration across countries. Also between the centrality is highly skewed, with more than half of the countries reduce recording a value of 0. So when we see the network, the trade network structure, you can see in the middle is South Africa. So we can see strong core and periphery structure. Also South Africa is the dominant hub among other African countries. And I found 14 core countries with 31 countries have 0 between us among the 53 African countries. So the export concentration shows that Tunisia, Kenya, Egypt, South Africa, and Uganda have more diversified and low HHI. And with Sao Tome, Algeria, Nigeria, Congo, and Gabon, most concentrated with high HHI. So the second finding is the regression result. I tested regression result with 4 models between the centrality, eigenvector centrality, and the other 2 models after excluding Nigeria, because Nigeria happened to be influential outliers, because Nigeria is one of the most central position. Nigeria has to be the influence. So after testing the earliest regression for 44 countries, so for both of 4 methods, between us and p-value happened to be non-significant. So the result hold whether using between us or eigenvector centrality with and without Nigeria. So the conclusion is trade network position and export diversification are statically independent. Centrality does not predict or guarantee diversification. So we start with the hypothesis 2. So our hypothesis is going to be rejected with these findings. So these 2 rotas to centrality or fundamental different statistics show why the regression happen to be the null result, because we can see both of side countries or central position, like South Africa, Kenya, Egypt, and Uganda, happen to be manufacturing-based hubs, so they have high centrality and low concentration. But when we see the other side, Nigeria, Angola, and Congo, and Mali also happen to be the central, but they use more trade volume with less commodity, so they happen to be high centrality and high concentration. So this shows us our regression model happen to be null, because not being the central countries will make you also to be more diversified in export concentration. So after doing my findings, implication for AFC FTA. First, diversified core benefit further for South Africa and Kenya. Tariff liberalization reinforce an already favorable structure position, and AFC FTA expands their manufacturing export networks. And also for concentrated core phase, reinforced lock-in for Nigeria and Angola, liberalization widen commodity export, channels without producing diversification, volume grows, and the structural dependency depends. And from the last, zero between us verifier is largely bypassed. We can see 31 countries with between us centrality 0, so lack physically intermediate connection. Trade fluctuation and infrastructure must precede an industrialized policy. So my policy implication and conclusion. So in the policy, coordinated industrial policy, ISI style, so market access alone cannot deliver diversification, and concentrated core economy like Nigeria and Angola, diversified productive basis, not just trade linkage, and zero betweenness, fair infrastructure, and trade facilitation as precondition. And differentiated AFC FTA implications scheduled by structural position. So the conclusion says my hypothesis 1 is accepted, because we began with saying there will be strong core and periphery structure among African countries. So we accept that. And for the second hypothesis is rejected because centrality does not predict diversification. So the null result is substantive finding. When it comes to the key insight, the two routes to centrality exist: manufacturer-led and commodity-led, with opposite implication for AFCFTA beneficiary. The limitation is analyzing cover only starting from 2050-2019, so pre-implementation. HHI is intra-Africans only. And these findings provide the useful benchmark for evaluating whether AFCFTA leads to greater diversification as more post-2021 trade data become available. Thank you.
Thank you. Grazie, abbiamo finito con i candidati. La Commissione si ritira della valutazione. Ci rivediamo tra 10 minuti. I candidati, per piacere, vengano qui, si dispongano in fila. Please come to the front in a line. E quando li chiamo verranno a firmare il verbale. When I will call your name, you will come here to sign. Selda Abbazzari. Per i poteri a me conferitimi la dichiaro dottoressa in Economics with Data Science con un voto di 98 su 110. Congratulations. Darmen Amanali. Per i poteri a me conferitimi la dichiaro dottore in Economia e Commercio con votazione di 83 su 110. Arman Aidarov. Per i poteri a me conferitimi la dichiaro dottore in Economia e Commercio con voti 80 su 110. Jahongir Bakhtov. Per i poteri a me conferitimi la dichiaro dottore in Economia e Commercio con voti 88 su 110. Hermelas Faubihane. Per i poteri a me conferitimi la dichiaro dottoressa in Economics with Data Science con voti 110 su 110 e la lode. Sara Bruni. Questo è magistrale. Per i poteri a me conferitimi la dichiaro dottoressa magistrale in Management con voti 110 110 e la lode. Gulnaz Ibrahimova. Per i poteri a me conferitimi la dichiaro dottoressa magistrale in Global Economy and Business con voti 108 su 110. Mona Kendi. Per i poteri a me conferitimi la dichiaro dottoressa magistrale in Economics and Entrepreneurship con voti 92 su 110. Amanullah Oria Kyle. Per i poteri a me conferitimi la dichiaro dottore magistrale in Global Economy and Business con voti 100 su 110. Arianna Pittiglio. Per i poteri a me conferitimi la dichiaro dottoressa in Economia e Commercio con voti 110 su 110 e la lode. Rajul Rai. Per i poteri a me conferitimi la dichiaro dottore in Global Economy and Business con voti 83 su 110. Alessandro Redi. Questo invece è triennale. Con i poteri a me conferitimi la dichiaro dottore in economia aziendale con voti 95 su 110. Rocco Ricci. Per i poteri a me conferitimi la dichiaro dottore in economia aziendale con voti 107 su 110. La Commissione ha molto apprezzato il suo lavoro. Bethlehem Arega Yitayeu.
Grazie. Grazie.
Per i poteri a me conferitimi la dichiaro dottoressa magistrale in Economics and Entrepreneurship con voto 97 su 110. I migliori auguri della Commissione per la vostra carriera. Grazie a tutti, abbiamo finito.